Welcome back everyone. Diamonds and coal. See, carbon has long been a valuable commodity, but we live in a world where you can now trade carbon credits. Now, it's our sneaking suspicion that bugger all people actually know what that really means. So John Sinclair, bless him, has decided to compile this beginner's guide to carbon credits.
Every time we drive our car or turn on a light, we're responsible for releasing gases into the atmosphere. Gases that are linked to global warming and climate change. This is called our carbon footprint. Carbon dioxide is the most common of these greenhouse gases, and it's used as the measuring stick for the other 5, which include methane and nitrous oxide. 5 years ago, New Zealand signed up to the Kyoto Protocol. It's a global agreement that's designed to reduce the planet's atmospheric carbon emissions, initially back to where they were in 1990. What Kyoto does is put a price on these carbon emissions, essentially turning the polluting gases into a tradable commodity.
It's almost like the penance that you would pay for doing something wrong when you go to the confessional. So basically a carbon credit exists because one person has something they want to compensate for and another person actually has the means of compensating it.
So what exactly is a carbon credit?
It's equal to a tonne of carbon dioxide emissions, but it's equal when you remove that carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. You have to do it in a way that is additional to business as usual. It has to be a permanent removal, and you're not allowed to go and cheat and do something else somewhere else.
The credits are a financial incentive to remove carbon from the atmosphere. Industries producing excessive emissions are charged for that pollution. The money is then used to fast-track and make viable projects that ultimately will benefit the environment. Forests are used as carbon sinks to soak up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere.
When a tree grows, it takes up carbon dioxide and it breaks up the carbon dioxide into carbon and oxygen, and the carbon is stored in the plant as wood.
Tree planting is the most widely known example of carbon credits. Here in New Zealand, Landcare Research have a carbon credit scheme. It pays for native forest to be re-established on land that would otherwise have little value.
We don't plant trees, it's a forest regeneration project. When you compare it to planting a site with native trees, you tend to get much higher density of seedlings than you could afford to put in at your site that you were actually planting.
It's calculated that every year, for each hectare of native forest, 3 tonnes of carbon dioxide is removed. 3 tonnes equals 3 carbon credits at around $22 a credit. Not big money, but carbon credits are a long-term commitment.
We expect that process of forest maturation to take, at least 200 years.
Surprisingly though, forests do have a use-by date.
Once your forest's at maturity, it no longer acts as a carbon sink and therefore you can't earn carbon credits off it.
Legally, these forests can't be cut down. A new one must be planted on new land.
Stoking up emissions through forests just buys us time. It's a short-term solution. And the key really is to have people reducing the amount of emissions they are responsible for.
Wind farms are another source of carbon credits.
If the wind farm is displacing the use of fossil fuels in order to generate electricity, then what you've done is you've prevented carbon dioxide going into the atmosphere. So you've displaced that. So in other words, that is actually doing something for the atmosphere.
The Te Apiti wind farm is an environmentally sustainable electricity generation scheme. It emits no carbon and therefore it offsets the emissions of older fossil-fuelled power stations. Income from the carbon credits is what made it economically viable.
The way to qualify to have carbon credits was that you had to show that you couldn't have that project without the funding you would gain from selling the carbon credits.
Carbon credits can also be generated by projects that clean up existing emissions, like at Christchurch's Burwood landfill.
What we've got here is a project which is really trying to mitigate the effects of disposing of organic waste. We're trying to clean up the problem.
By selling carbon credits, the Christchurch City Council has been able to invest in this project that collects methane. Some of it is used to heat and power the QE2 pool complex. The rest is burned off, converting it to CO2 and water.
The idea of burning the methane coming from the landfill is to reduce its global warming potential. All of the costs of putting in the infrastructure are paid for by the carbon credits. This project would have not happened if the government hadn't signed the Kyoto Protocol.
In the end, buying carbon credits isn't a get-out-of-jail-free card. The main message of Kyoto is that we must permanently reduce our carbon emissions, not just offset them. Making it costly to pollute is only buying time.
What they're hoping will happen is that if the market is setting the price on carbon and carbon becomes more and more expensive to emit, then that will be the incentive for more and more people to take action, because if you don't take action it's going to cost more.
John Sinclair.